In this video, we're going to move on from our problem statement and identifying the input, output, and processing, and use the information that we came up with to write our solution algorithm. Sometimes, I know it can be confusing, the difference between the algorithm and the pseudocode. So our algorithm is not formatted in a specific way. We just write it as regular sentences. Pseudocode is another way to write the algorithm, but it's formatted in a specific way to look more like a programming language. But it's always best to start with just the solution algorithm written in sentences. Each sentence on each line is one step in the instructions of the program. So one step in the process that will satisfy the original problem statement, what we want the program to do. We can use the problem statement as a guide, as well as the input, output, and processing components that we identified in the previous step. Especially this processing section will be very helpful in deciding what sentences, dividing up our sentences so that each one is a separate step, and what kind of words and phrases to use in describing the action of the program. So our very first step, if we look at our chart here, was to prompt for the high temperature and low temperature. So we can write that here. Okay, so that is our very first step. On a new line, we're going to move on to the second step, which is to calculate the average temperature. Now, you may want to go ahead and break this down to how you would calculate the average temp. It's fine to just put calculate average temp, but at this point, if you go ahead and write the calculation, it will help you when you're designing the pseudocode. So I'll write calculate average temp by adding high temp and low temp and dividing the sum by 2. So this will be the calculation we'll use. The average is adding the figures together and then dividing the sum by however many items you have, in this case 2. The next step is going to be, according to our chart, displaying the average temp and displaying a message telling the user whether the average temperature was hot, cold, or moderate, which goes back to our temperature range chart. So here we may want to add a little more information. We're going to have to compare the average temp with each of these ranges in order to decide whether the message should say that the temperature was hot, cold, or moderate. So here we need to add a step that the program should compare average temp to temperature ranges to determine if average temp is hot, cold, or moderate. Okay, now once we have that determined, then we can go on to displaying our output. So here we can go ahead and write the step, display average temp, and as a hint, we're going to have to use an if-then statement. We're going to have to compare average temp using that if-then statement, and I'll write the step like this. If average temp is hot, display a message telling the user that the average temperature was hot. And I can basically just copy the same sentence for the three different options. So hot, cold, and moderate. Now you'll see that when we move on to the pseudocode, this will look a little bit different. The compare and the display of the message will sort of be combined, but this helps you to at least outline what steps you need to include once you get to your pseudocode. So now we have our solution algorithm. If it helps, you can also number the steps. And this can kind of help you to break it up as well. But first, we prompt the user for high temp and low temp. Next, calculate average temp by adding high temp and low temp and dividing the sum by 2. Then compare average temp to temperature ranges to determine if average temp is hot, cold, or moderate. Next, display average temp, and if average temp is hot, display a message telling the user that the average temperature was hot. If average temp is cold, display a message telling the user that the average temperature was cold. If average temp is moderate, display a message telling the user that the average temperature was moderate. And in fact, we could go ahead and add in a little bit more information here by putting the temperature range there. So we could even say if average temperature is 80 degrees or higher, then it's hot. If average temp is 59 degrees or lower, it's cold. If average temp is 60 to 79 degrees, then it's moderate. So you can also add those extra details in there that will help you again when you're going to your pseudocode. There's no absolute set way to do this or how you have to write the sentences, but these are just some recommendations to help keep you organized and help you as you progress from step to step. So in the next video, then we'll actually be writing the pseudocode, which is where we will take these sentences and convert it into a more formatted display that looks like a programming language.